The night my father celebrated 43 years of marriage, in a backyard full of family, church women, and old family friends, he looked at my husband and asked what he did these days to keep busy. When Owen said he taught history and coached debate at North Green High, my father smiled like he had been handed a punchline and said, "So they pay you to keep teenagers pointed in the right direction until the bell rings?" My 5-year-old daughter was sitting on Owen's lap when he said it, and what stayed with me was not the insult. It was the way Ivy looked up and asked why Grandpa was talking about Daddy like that. Owen did not flinch. He set down his fork, looked at my father like a man hearing out loud what he had known for years, and said nothing. 2 days later, that same quiet husband would stand in a crowded civic hall in Greenville and receive something my father could neither buy nor belittle. My name is Willa. I am 35, an ER nurse in Greenville, South Carolina, and this is the story of how one anniversary dinner and one phone call after 6 years of silence changed my family for good. 9 days earlier, I was halfway through a late shift in the ER at Greenville Memorial when my phone buzzed in the pocket of my scrub jacket. I was standing outside a trauma room waiting for labs on a man with chest pain and a wife who kept asking me if he was dying every 30 seconds. I glanced down, saw Marianne, and felt my stomach tighten. My mother had a voice made for asking forgiveness she never intended to earn. I stepped into the supply alcove and answered on the fourth ring. "Honey." She was already crying, or doing a good enough version of it that I could not tell the difference over the sound of the vents. "Your father has been asking about Ivy. He keeps saying she is getting big, and we don't even know her. I just don't want that little girl growing up without knowing where she comes from." I leaned my shoulder against the metal shelving and closed my eyes. It had been over 6 years since I had set foot in Midland for anything longer than a funeral home visit and a drive back out. 6 years since my father had stood in his kitchen in that same house and told me that if I married a public school teacher, I could not expect him to smile and pretend I had thrown my life away. 6 years since I decided I was done begging to be understood. Still, she knew exactly where to press. "A little girl should know her family," she said. When I got home that night, Owen was at the kitchen table with a stack of student essays, a red pen in one hand, and his reading glasses halfway down his nose. Ivy had fallen asleep on the couch with one sock on and a coloring book open across her stomach. "Mom called," I told him. He looked up right away. That was one of the thousand small reasons I loved him. He never made me fight for his attention. "She wants us to come to their anniversary dinner next weekend. Says Dad wants to see Ivy." Owen capped his pen and sat back. "If you want to go, we go. That's simple. No lecture, no wounded pride, no making me choose between defending him and protecting whatever was left of me around my family." I studied his face, looking for hesitation. "You know he is going to say something." "Probably. And you still want to go?" He glanced toward Ivy, then back at me. "If you want your daughter to meet them, I am not going to stand in the way of that, but I am not walking in there pretending to be a different man just to make your father comfortable." That was Owen. Not soft, not loud, just clear. On the counter beside the coffee maker, there was a thick envelope with Greenville County Public Schools printed in blue across the top. His name was on the front. I reached for it without thinking. "What is this?" He took it gently from my hand and folded it once against the counter. "District paperwork. Nothing urgent." At that exact moment, his phone lit up with a missed call from Principal Pike. He silenced it before it could ring a second time. Most wives would have pushed. Maybe I should have. Instead, I looked at Ivy asleep on the couch, at Owen in that faded t-shirt with red pen on his fingers, and let it go. 6 years earlier, after one dinner too many where my father spoke to Owen like he was a temporary embarrassment, I had cut contact and told myself I was finally done smoothing everything over. I was done being the daughter who translated cruelty into concern, who excused arrogance as old-fashioned values, who made everybody comfortable at her own expense. But one crying phone call from my mother, and there I was again, standing in my own kitchen, weighing my child against my boundaries, like the lesson had never fully taken. The drive to Midland took a little over 3 hours. Ivy asked if cows slept standing up, if church ladies were always old, and if Grandpa Russell would have candy. By the time we turned onto my parents' road, dusk had gone soft and blue over the fields. The house looked exactly the same. Red brick ranch, white porch rail, the same hydrangea bushes my mother babied through every southern summer. Marianne was already outside before Owen had even put the car in park. She came down the porch steps with her arms open. Russell stood behind her in the doorway, broad-shouldered even at 68, one hand in his pocket, watching us arrive like a man inspecting a delivery. When we stepped inside, the first thing I noticed was not the lemon oil smell or the framed family photos or the fact that my mother still kept the same ceramic bowl on the foyer table. It was the stack of place cards lined up neatly on the sideboard. Dinner tonight, anniversary gathering tomorrow. Every name already written, every seat already planned. The house was warm, polished, welcoming in all the ways a place can be when it has been prepared for witnesses. I stood there with my overnight bag still hanging from my shoulder and looked at those cards. Mom had not just invited us home, she had prepared for our arrival. My mother still smelled like lavender lotion and hairspray when she pulled me into her arms. She held on a second too long, long enough for it to register as something more than a welcome, less than an apology. The kind of hug meant to soften the edges before anyone had to say out loud what had happened in this house 6 years ago, or what might happen again before the weekend was over. "Oh, honey, look at you," Marianne murmured into my hair. "Let me see you." She leaned back with both hands on my shoulders, like she was taking inventory. Then her face changed in an instant when she saw Ivy half hidden behind Owen's leg. "There she is! There is my girl!" Ivy stepped closer only after Owen gave her a small nod. My mother crouched, all soft smile and careful hands, and Russell, still standing in the doorway behind her, reached into his pocket and pulled out a tiny silver toy car. "For the little lady," he said. It was expensive, not flashy, just the sort of thing that told you he'd picked it from the glass case, not the checkout aisle. Ivy took it with both hands and whispered, "Thank you." That was the thing about families like mine. Cruelty never showed up alone. It traveled with gestures that made you question your own memory. Russell shook Owen's hand next, firm, brief, impersonal. "Good drive up?" "Not bad." "You found the place all right?" Owen gave him the smallest hint of a smile. Hard to miss the only brick house on the road with a flagpole out front. My father did not laugh, but the corner of his mouth moved like he almost respected the answer. Inside, everything looked exactly where it had always been. The same runner in the hallway, the same pale yellow walls, the same framed family portrait from the summer before I left for college, still hanging over the piano, still pretending time had stopped in the 1 year all of us knew how to smile at the camera. I set my bag down by the stairs and glanced toward the sideboard again. The place cards were still there, neat as church bulletins. One stack for dinner that night, another for the anniversary gathering the next day. One card still turned upside down. "Who is that for?" I asked. My mother's answer came too fast. "Just an old family friend." Then she was already steering Ivy toward the kitchen. "I made sweet tea. Ivy, do you want to help me put ice in the glasses?" That was Marianne's gift. She could redirect a room so smoothly, people mistook it for kindness. Daphne came in through the back door carrying a bakery box and the kind of tired expression that made my chest tighten before she even spoke. She hugged me hard, hugged Owen a little awkwardly, then touched Ivy's cheek and told her she had gotten taller since Christmas, even though we had not seen each other at Christmas either. "You look good," I told her. "You look like you sleep less than I do." That got a real smile out of her, but only for a second. In the kitchen, while Marianne fussed over plates and Russell took Owen outside to look at some meaningless thing in the yard, Daphne stood beside me at the counter, cutting lemon slices with a steak knife. "If Dad starts in on Owen tomorrow, don't let him get a rise out of him." I turned to look at her. "Starts in on him how?" Daphne kept cutting. "You know how he is." "No," I said quietly. "I know how he was. You sound like you know something else." She finally met my eyes, and whatever was there disappeared almost as soon as I saw it. "I'm just saying, be careful." That was all I got. Dinner that first night was just the six of us. Pot roast, green beans, mashed potatoes, the same meal my mother had made 100 Sundays when I was growing up. The familiar table should have made me relax. Instead, it made every silence feel rehearsed. Russell carved the meat while asking Owen questions that wore concern like a costume. "What does a public school teacher make in Greenville these days?" "Enough for us," Owen said. Enough is one of those words people use when they don't want to say a number. I set my fork down. "We're doing fine, Dad." He nodded like I had confirmed a theory. "Daycare can't be cheap. Mortgage rates are still high. Groceries are outrageous. I just wonder when a man looks at all that and thinks maybe I should move into administration, maybe build something with a little more weight behind it." Before I could answer, my mother jumped in with a smile that did not fool me. "Your father worries, that's all. He always has." I looked at her. That was the sentence she had used my whole life to lacquer over damage. Across from me, Owen cut his pot roast one bite at a time and chewed like my father was discussing weather. Russell reached for his water glass. "I ran into Graham Whitaker a few weeks ago. Smart young man, built himself from the ground up, knows how to move in the world." My mother nodded. "He's got that development project outside Charlotte now, and another one near Columbia. Very ambitious." There it was. Not a name dropped in passing, a standard laid carefully on the table between us. I kept my face still. Ivy was busy lining peas in a row beside her plate, oblivious to everything except the silver car parked beside her milk glass. After dinner, I carried plates into the kitchen while Marianne wrapped leftovers and Russell stacked casserole dishes. My shoulders were tight to ache. Owen's phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up with a preview from Gideon Pike. "Tomorrow scheduled is confirmed." I saw it. So did Daphne. Owen came in a second later, flipped the phone face down, and started rinsing plates. "Everything okay?" Marianne asked. "School stuff," Owen said. She smiled. "Of course." Later, while Owen was upstairs helping Ivy brush her teeth in the bathroom off my old room, Daphne caught me alone in the hallway by the linen closet. "Mrs. Cargill asked Mom yesterday if you and Owen had been under strain lately." I stared at her. "What?" Daphne crossed her arms tight over her middle, like maybe things had been hard for a while, like maybe you two were figuring things out. Who told her that? She looked toward the stairs before answering. "Nobody says things directly around here, you know that." My pulse started to pound in my ears. I had not told one person in Midland anything about my marriage because there was nothing to tell. Not one thing. When I went upstairs, Owen was sitting on the edge of the bed in my old room while Ivy arranged stuffed animals in a line across the quilt my mother had put out. He looked up the second he saw my face. "What happened?" I closed the door behind me. "Someone has been telling people we're having problems." He was quiet for a moment, not shocked, just taking the shape of it in. Then he said, "Your dad isn't testing me, Willa." I leaned back against the dresser. "Then what is he doing?" He's testing whether you still know how to make yourself smaller when he wants the room back. That landed harder than anything Russell had said at dinner. I did not answer right away. Owen stood, crossed the room, and squeezed my hand once. Whatever this weekend is, we get through it and go home. After Ivy fell asleep, I went downstairs for a glass of water. The house had gone still in that way old houses do, like they are listening to themselves breathe. The kitchen light over the sink was the only one on. As I passed the sideboard, I stopped. The place cards were still stacked in 2 neat rows. My mother had turned the upside-down one face down again, but not all the way, just enough for one edge of thick cream paper to show. I slid it free. Graham Whittaker. I stood there in the half-dark with that card in my hand and saw the whole thing at once. The careful questions at dinner, my mother's quick answer, my father talking about Graham like he was reading from a brochure for the life I should have chosen, the rumors already drifting through church kitchens and back patios. This was not a family reunion. It was a seating chart. I looked down the hallway toward the staircase, toward the room where my daughter was sleeping, toward the room where my husband had laid his head under my parents' roof because I had asked him to come. I had not come home. I had walked my family into a room where my father had already decided where each of us belonged. By 9 the next morning, my mother had 3 women from church in the kitchen, 2 folding tables open on the patio, and enough flowers in mason jars to make the whole place look like a magazine spread for people who liked pretending family life could be arranged. Marianne moved through it all with a smile and a dish towel over one shoulder, directing pies to the shade and iced tea to the long drinks tub, like she had not spent the evening before helping my father sand down my husband in front of our daughter. Russell was worse in his own way. He did not bark orders. He did not need to. He stood near the grill with one hand in his pocket, one hand around a coffee mug, and people simply adjusted themselves around him. Chairs shifted, coolers got moved, conversations bent. That was my father's real talent. He did not dominate a room by being the loudest man in it. He did it by making everyone else understand, without being told twice, where they fit. Guests began drifting in a little after noon. A couple from my parents' church, one of Russell's old business friends and his wife from Columbia, Mrs. Rook from 3 houses down, who still wore lipstick before lunch and always smelt faintly of talcum powder, 2 cousins from Spartanburg I had not seen in years. Nobody said anything rude, nobody had to. Small towns in the South know how to judge with a smile on. I was standing near the drink table refilling Ivy's lemonade when a dark SUV pulled into the driveway and Russell straightened before the engine had even cut off. Graham Whittaker stepped out in a navy sport coat and open collar, holding a bottle of bourbon like he had not been warned he was walking into a family performance. He looked exactly like the kind of man my father enjoyed pointing to as evidence that the world still made sense. Clean haircut, expensive watch, the confidence of someone used to rooms letting him in. Russell crossed the yard to meet him with a warmth I had not seen him show Owen once since we arrived. "Graham, glad you made it. Wouldn't miss it." He handed over the bottle and looked around like he was trying to get his bearings. When his eyes landed on me, he smiled politely, a little uncertain. "Willa, it's been a long time." "It has. You look well. So do you." That was the whole thing. No history hanging in the air, no secret past, just a man my father liked because he fit a picture. Owen came up beside me with Ivy on his hip. Graham offered his hand first. "Owen, good to finally meet you." Owen shifted Ivy slightly and shook it. "You too." Nothing in Graham's face suggested he had come there to cause trouble. If anything, he looked like a man who'd been told this was an anniversary party and was only just realizing he had been assigned a role in it, which made what my father was doing somehow worse. The social lines became clearer once everyone settled into the flow of the afternoon. Russell kept Graham near him, introduced him twice to people who already knew who he was, talked about his development work outside Charlotte, the retail project near Columbia, the mixed-use property that was, according to my father, the kind of thing that changed a whole town. He's got vision, Russell said to nobody and everybody, knows how to build something that lasts. The words floated straight past me and landed where he wanted them to. A woman from church, whose name I could not remember, asked Owen what he taught, and before he could answer, Russell cut in from across the yard. History, at North Green High in Greenville. Just that. No mention of the debate team, no mention of the students who still emailed him years after graduation, no mention that he was the kind of teacher teenagers trusted with the parts of themselves they hid from everybody else. I watched my father do what he had always done best. He reduced people without ever raising his voice. He trimmed away the important parts until what remained looked small enough for the room to agree with him. Daphne found me in the pantry while I was reaching for extra paper napkins. She closed the door halfway behind her, not all the way people do when they have spent years learning how not to get caught being honest. "Dad called Graham 3 weeks ago," she said. I turned toward her. Called him for what? Her mouth tightened. I heard him. He said it might do you good to see a different kind of life up close again. For a second, I just stared at her. Then she added the rest, because once one truth was out there, there was no point pretending the smaller ones still mattered. "A few people here already think things have been rough between you and Owen. Dad told them you've looked tired for years, that your marriage has not exactly been easy." My throat went dry. He said that to people? Not like a statement, more like one of his thoughtful observations. You know how he does it. I did know. My father rarely lied in full. He preferred suggestion. It gave everyone else the satisfaction of participating in the story. The lunch crowd shifted toward dinner as the sun dipped lower and the yard changed from casual gathering to seated event. Place cards came out, exactly where I had expected them to. Graham near me, Owen not beside me, but down and across, like a man included out of courtesy rather than belonging. I moved the cards before anyone sat down. Russell moved them back while people were still unfolding napkins. By the time everyone was seated, I understood that whatever civility he had extended so far had not been peace, it had been staging. Dinner started with the usual anniversary nonsense. 43 years, faith, perseverance, good neighbors, good friends. Then Russell rested one hand on the back of his chair and looked straight at Owen. "Tell me something. Do you ever think about doing more?" The yard went still in pieces, not all at once, but enough. Owen set his fork down. More what? More than keeping teenagers pointed in the right direction until the bell rings every afternoon? There it was. A few people looked at their plates. Someone cleared a throat. Marianne stared at her folded napkin like if she focused hard enough she could disappear into it. My father took a sip of bourbon and kept going. "I've always believed a grown man ought to build security, not just lesson plans." Ivy looked from him to Owen. "Why are you talking about Daddy like that?" Every nerve in my body fired at once. "Dad," I said, "that's enough." Russell turned his head toward me slowly, like he was almost amused I had spoken. "Enough for who?" "For me, for my husband, for my daughter. You owe him an apology." Before he could answer, Marianne leaned in with that same soft panic that had kept this family running on excuses my entire life. "Please don't turn this into a scene." I looked at her and something in me hardened, not because I was surprised, because I was tired of being proven right. Owen stood before I could say another word. He slid his chair back, lifted Ivy into his arms, and brushed a kiss over the side of her head. "Come on, Ladybug, let's go look for fireflies." She wrapped her arms around his neck without argument. That hurt too. She trusted him so completely she did not even ask why we needed to leave the table. He carried her through the side gate toward the darker stretch of yard near the hedges. I stood a moment longer under the string lights, feeling every eye that would not meet mine. No one stopped him. No one stopped my father either. That was when I understood the real cost of staying polite. Not that Owen would keep being insulted. He could survive Russell. It was that Ivy would learn to sit still while people who claimed to love her treated her father like less than. I found them near the fence line a few minutes later. Fireflies blinked low over the grass, little sparks floating in the dark. Owen had crouched down so he was eye level with Ivy, his voice low enough that I had to stand still to hear it. Sometimes grown-ups say things that are more about themselves than the person they're talking about. Was Grandpa being mean? He was being unkind. Did Daddy do something bad? No, sweetheart, not even a little. He said it so simply, so cleanly, like truth did not need decoration. I stayed in the doorway between the patio light and the dark yard and watched my husband repair something my family had tried to damage in less than 30 seconds. He was not dramatic. He was not loud. He was just there, steady, explaining the world to our daughter without letting his own hurt spill onto her. And for the first time since we arrived in Midland, I stopped asking myself how to get through the weekend without making things worse. I started asking what exactly I would be teaching my daughter if I kept pretending this was still just uncomfortable. That night, after Ivy was asleep and Owen was downstairs getting us both a glass of water, I stood at the sink in my old bathroom with my face half washed and my heart still pounding from dinner. The room looked exactly like it had when I was 17. Same cheap brass mirror, same drawer that stuck unless you lifted it first, same pale blue towels my mother always kept for guests, even when the guest was her own daughter. My phone buzzed against the counter. A message from Daphne. "Meet me at Mason's Diner tomorrow morning. There's more you don't know." I stared at the words for a second long. By then, I was no longer asking myself what my father might say next. I was asking what he had already done behind my back. By morning, I needed facts more than sleep. Mason's Diner sat just off the highway outside town, all cracked vinyl booths and coffee that could strip paint. Daphne was already there when I walked in, still in yesterday's mascara, hair pulled back too fast, a paper cup of coffee in both hands like she needed something hot just to keep herself together. She looked up the second she saw me and did not waste time pretending this was breakfast. "I did not know how bad it was," she said, "not all of it." I slid into the booth across from her. "Start talking." Daphne glanced toward the counter, then lowered her voice. "Dad did not just invite Graham. He called him 3 weeks ago. I heard him. He said it might do you good to see a different kind of life up close again." I stared at her. She kept going, faster now, like if she stopped, she would lose her nerve. "He told Aunt Cheryl you had looked worn down for years. He told Tom Blevins from church that Owen was a decent man, but not really the kind of man a woman like you should have settled for. He told Mr. Carver from the dealership that some women outgrow the life they married into and just need time to admit it." A waitress came by and asked if I wanted coffee. I nodded because opening my mouth felt risky. "He never had to say divorce," Daphne said. "He just kept saying enough for people to fill in the rest on their own." My coffee landed in front of me with a soft clink. I wrapped both hands around the mug and felt absolutely nothing from the heat. "What about Mom?" Daphne's face changed in a way that answered before she did. "She knew Graham was coming. She knew where he was sitting. She knew Dad wanted him there for you to see. She just kept saying maybe it would not get out of hand." I looked down at the black surface of my coffee. Maybe it would not get out of hand. That was my mother's religion. Maybe if everyone stayed soft enough, small enough, agreeable enough, the worst thing in the room would somehow become survivable. I let out a breath that didn't feel like enough air. "She helped him." Daphne shook her head once, then tried again. "She didn't set it up like he did, but she knew. She knew, Willa." That landed harder than what my father had done, maybe because I had expected him to be exactly who he was. My mother was the one I still kept leaving room for. "I should have told you sooner," Daphne said. "I know that." "Why didn't you?" Her eyes filled, but she did not cry. "Because I have lived in that house my whole life. Because by the time I know I should say something, it already feels too late." I looked at her then, really looked at her. and for the first time, I did not see my older sister as weak or complicit or disappointing. I saw a woman who had spent 40 years being trained to mistake fear for peace. When I got back to the motel, Owen was sitting at the small round table by the window, with Ivy's sneakers lined up beside his chair and the thick district envelope open in front of him. Ivy was on the bed watching cartoons with the volume low enough to keep one ear on us. I closed the door and set my bag down. Daphne told me everything. He nodded once, not surprised. I pulled out the chair across from him. Then you tell me everything too. Owen slid the letter across the table. Greenville County Public Schools, District Teacher of the Year. I read the line once, then again. I looked up at him, and for a second, I was angry before I was proud. You knew. For about 2 weeks. And you did not tell me. He leaned back in the chair, tired and calm at the same time. I wanted the timing settled first. Gideon said not to say anything until the district finalized the schedule and confirmed the speakers. It is this afternoon at Upstate Regional Civic Hall. I kept staring at the page. There were names, signatures, official language, a list of program details. I saw Adrian Quill and Leona Presley and had to sit with that too because I knew both names from stories Owen had told over the years, never to impress me, always just because he worried about his kids even after they were grown. You were just going to walk into that after this weekend and not say a word to my parents? He met my eyes. I was not going for your parents. Then why keep it from me? Because I know your father, and I know what this would become if he knew. I did not want this to turn into a scoreboard. I did not want you thinking I was carrying some secret around to prove something to him. I looked back at the letter. A district award. Hundreds of people. Former students speaking on his behalf. You should have told me. Probably. He rubbed one hand over his jaw. But I wanted one thing in my life that was still about the people it belonged to. I sat very still with the paper in my hands. I want to leave right now, I said. I want to pack Ivy up, drive back to Greenville, and never let my parents get within 10 feet of her again. We can leave, he said, but I am still going this afternoon. I looked up sharply. After what he said to you? Yes. To prove him wrong? No, he shook his head. Because if I skip a room full of students and colleagues who showed up for me just because one man thinks my life is too small, then I am teaching exactly the wrong lesson. That took the air out of my anger in the worst way, because it was so cleanly true. A little before 10, we went back to the house to get the rest of our things and try to leave without another scene. That was my plan, anyway. Brunch was already on the table by the time we walked in. Biscuits, scrambled eggs, bacon, cut fruit, my mother moving dishes around like she could rearrange the morning into something kind. My father at the head of the table in a fresh polo, acting like last night had been an awkward misunderstanding everyone sensible would now step around. Ivy climbed into her chair beside Owen. Russell smiled at her with all the warmth he denied her father. "There's my girl. You sleep good?" She nodded. He buttered half a biscuit and slid it toward her plate. "You know, sweetheart, if your daddy had gone into a real profession, you might have had a whole upstairs bedroom by now. Big windows, one of those fancy little reading nooks girls love." My whole body went cold. He said it lightly, casually, like he was talking about weather. That was what made it evil. I stood before I even knew I was moving. "No." The whole table stilled. "You do not get to talk to my daughter that way," I said. "You do not get to tell her her father is less than. Not in a joke, not in passing, not ever." Russell looked up at me with that same maddening calm. "I am just being honest with the child." "No, you are teaching my child to disrespect her father." Marianne reached for my wrist across the table. "Willa, please, not here." I pulled my hand back. "That is the problem, Mom. It is always not here, not now, not like this, and somehow that always means never." Russell pushed his chair back a few inches. "If you are that determined to be offended, that's your choice." Behind me, I heard another chair move. Daphne stepped around the corner of the table and came to stand beside me. She did not say anything. She did not need to. My father's eyes flicked to her, and I watched him register the shape of the room changing. Owen stood then, not angry, not loud. He picked up Ivy's backpack from beside the mudroom door and slung it over his shoulder. "Come on, Bug, we're heading out." Ivy looked between all of us, confused but quiet. She held her silver toy car in one hand and reached for her dad with the other. Russell's voice dropped half a register. "If you walk out again, don't expect to come back." I turned to him and felt something in me settle for good. "I have not lived in this house for years, Dad. The only question left is whether you ever get to be part of my daughter's life." For once, he had nothing ready. We left with a duffel bag, Ivy's booster seat, and the rest of our dignity. Marianne followed us out to the porch, still trying to keep the whole thing from becoming real. "Call me when you cool down," she pleaded. I opened the back door and buckled Ivy in myself. This is not me cooling down. This is me waking up. Back at the motel, the room felt painfully small, but honest. Ivy fell asleep after lunch with one hand curled around that little silver car. Owen showered and put on the navy tie he wore to parent conferences and awards nights, the one with the tiny stitch loose at the edge. I was sitting on the bed tying my sandal when my phone rang. Daphne. I answered on the first ring. "What happened?" She sounded breathless. "I think I screwed up." My stomach dropped. "Mom asked where you went. I said you had somewhere to be in Greenville this afternoon. Dad heard me. He kept asking what kind of thing. I said school event. I should have kept my mouth shut." I looked over at Owen, adjusting his cuff in the mirror. "He wants to come," Daphne said quietly. "He thinks whatever this is will prove he's right." After the call ended, I sat there with the phone in my hand for a long time. Then I looked at my husband, standing in a motel room in South Carolina, in a shirt I had ironed on our kitchen counter the night before, getting ready to walk into a room my father would never know how to measure. And I understood that for the first time in my life, Russell Sloan was heading somewhere he did not get to arrange the seating. The ceremony started at 4, which meant we had just enough time to get back to Greenville before the doors opened. The drive back to Greenville felt nothing like the drive to Midland. Same highway, same gas stations, same long stretches of pine and billboards and sun-bleached exits. But inside our car, the quiet was different. It was not the tight, airless kind I had grown up with, the kind where everyone felt one wrong word away from setting off the person with the most power. This quiet had room in it. Ivy fell asleep 20 minutes outside town, with the little silver car still clutched in one hand. Owen drove with one elbow on the window ledge, tie loosened, expression steady. I watched the road unspool ahead of us and realized I had spent years confusing tension with family. Upstate Regional Civic Hall sat just off the county complex, all brick and glass and clean sidewalks bordered by crepe myrtles. It was exactly the kind of place a public school district would use for an award ceremony, big enough to feel official, ordinary enough to feel real. There were teachers in work clothes and teachers in suits, parents holding programs, students in pressed shirts who looked both bored and proud. A cluster of district staff stood near a welcome table with name tags and bottled water. Nothing about it was flashy. That was what made it matter. Owen checked in with a woman at the front and got a folder and a blue ribbon pin. Principal Pike intercepted him halfway to the doors and shook his hand with both of his. "Glad you made it," Gideon said. "Your people are here." Owen glanced back at me and Ivy and smiled. "Right here." We took seats in the third row. Ivy sat straight for about 15 seconds before sliding against my side with her program open in her lap. I had just bent to whisper that she needed to keep her shoes off the seat when I saw them. Russell and Marianne had come in through the side entrance. They were dressed for what they thought respectability required. My father in a sport coat he wore to funerals and fundraisers, my mother in a navy dress with pearls that looked too careful for the room. They hesitated before choosing seats 4 rows behind us. For the first time in my life, I watched my father enter a room and fail to become the center of it. Noel Sayer, the district superintendent, stepped to the podium after the opening remarks. She was tall, silver-haired, and carried herself like somebody who had spent years running meetings where people tried to interrupt her and regretted it. "Every year," she said, "we recognize an educator whose work cannot be measured by test scores alone, because the real impact of a teacher shows up in lives." I felt my shoulders tighten. She spoke about consistency, about trust, about the kind of adult students look for in a hallway when their world is coming apart. Then she invited the first former student to speak. Adrian Quill looked too young to be a doctor until you saw the way he carried himself. He unfolded a single sheet of paper, took one breath, and started anyway. "There was a year in high school when I was working nights at a gas station and sleeping in my car behind a church lot because I did not have anywhere else to go. Most adults either pretended not to notice or waited for me to get my act together before they offered help. Mr. Mercer was the only one who did not make me earn concern first." The room went still. "He found out I was falling asleep in class and stopped me after school. He did not ask what was wrong with me, he asked if I had eaten. Then he started finding reasons to keep me on campus until debate practice ended so I would not be alone before my shift. Years later, when I got into med school, he was one of the first people I called." I pressed my hand over my mouth. Leona Presley came next, sharp and composed in a dark blazer, every inch a young attorney. She smiled when she looked at Owen. "Mr. Mercer taught me history, but what he really taught me was that where you come from does not get the final vote on who you become." There were laughs at that, soft ones, the kind that come when people feel truth land cleanly. When they called Owen's name, the room stood, not all at once, but in a wave. Teachers, parents, students, people who had come because they knew what he was to that school. Ivy shot up too, clapping so hard her whole body bounced. "That's my daddy," she whispered, loud enough for the row around us to hear. I turned just once. Russell was sitting very still, hands on his knees, face emptied out in a way I had never seen before. No anger, no smirk, no strategy, just a man listening to a room use a language he had never respected, and suddenly realizing it carried more weight than his own. Owen's speech was exactly what it should have been, short, steady, not written to wound anyone. "I didn't go into teaching for the paycheck," he said, and a few people smiled. "I stayed because kids know when the adults in their lives really show up for them. They know it long before they have the words to explain it. If I've done anything worth honoring, it's that I tried to be there when it counted." That was all. No grandstanding, no coded revenge, just truth. Afterward, the lobby filled with voices and handshakes and folded programs. Taryn Holt from the Greenville Ledger was already talking to Adrian near the wall. Russell found us near the side doors once the first crowd thinned. "Willa." I turned, Ivy on one hip now, the award program folded in my hand. He looked at Owen first. "I may have been harder on you than I needed to be." It was the closest he could get to an apology without feeling like he was surrendering skin. Owen's face did not change. "You never asked who I was. You just decided I wasn't enough." My father opened his mouth, then closed it. Marianne stepped in before the silence could finish the job for him. Her eyes were red. She had cried during the speeches. I had seen that much. "We only wanted what was best," she said. "For who?" I asked. She had no answer that could survive daylight. "You knew what he was doing," I said. "You knew Graham was coming. You knew what people were hearing. You did not stop any of it." Her hand went to her chest like I had struck her. "Willa, I never wanted it to go that far." It went exactly where no one stopped it from going. Russell looked down at Ivy then, maybe hoping grandchildren still offered a shortcut where daughters no longer did. I shifted her higher on my hip before he could speak. If you want any relationship with her, I said, it starts with respect. For him, for me. No more comments about money, jobs, what a real man should be, what kind of life you think I should have chosen. No more private visits, no more little poison wrapped up as concern. One more time and we are done. He stared at me. And for once, I did not feel 12 or 18 or 29. I felt exactly my age. Marianne started crying again. This time, I let her. Daphne found me in the parking lot 10 minutes later while Owen strapped Ivy into her car seat. She had driven separately and was standing beside a faded Corolla I had never actually noticed before. "I signed a lease this morning," she said. I blinked. "What?" "One bedroom outside Columbia. Nothing fancy. I kept thinking I was being dramatic, that I should wait, that I should calm down. Then I realized I've been calling fear maturity for years." I laughed, then cried, then hugged her harder than I meant to. A short article ran in the Ledger 2 days later, with a photo of Owen holding his plaque and a quote from Leona about history not being destiny. People in Midland saw it. People in Marianne's church circle saw it. People who had nodded along to Russell's careful little observations suddenly had to swallow a different version of events, one printed in black and white with my husband's face beside it. No one ever called to ask me if my marriage was under strain again. We did not cut my parents out overnight. Real life is rarely that clean. But the rules changed. They no longer got automatic access just because they shared blood with me. They no longer got to speak about my husband like he was a regrettable choice and still expect a seat at my daughter's table. A week later, I came home from a shift and found Owen at the kitchen table with a stack of essays, Ivy beside him with crayons spread in a bright little fan over the wood. He was grading papers. She was drawing a horse that looked like a loaf of bread with legs. The dishwasher hummed. The house smelled faintly like coffee and pencil shavings. And standing there with my bag still on my shoulder, I finally understood something my father never had. A family is not built by the loudest person in the yard, or the richest person in the room, or the one most determined to be obeyed. It is built by the person who keeps showing up, the one who holds steady, the one who teaches the people under his roof what respect looks like by living it. I used to think the victory would feel loud. I thought it would sound like a perfect apology, or a slammed door, or everybody finally saying I had been right. It didn't. It felt like quiet in a house where no one had to make themselves smaller to keep the peace. If someone in your family ever spoke to your husband or wife that way in front of your child, what boundary would you set first? And if stories like this stay with you, stay here. There is more coming.